You just imagine her there, storming past, knowing that she had a revolver in her handbag. Those of you familiar with Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment, where you're placed in that position where you ask one question, can murder be justified? Let's see how you feel by the end of this video.
On June the 21st, Ruth Ellis was found guilty of murder at the Old Bailey and sentenced to death in accordance with the law. On July the 13th, she was executed in accordance with the law. But Britain's conscience was uneasy. During those 3 weeks, while public controversy mounted, one man had a terrible decision to make, Home Secretary William Lloyd George. As he went about his public duties, he had to decide whether or not to write the grim words, "The law must take its course." But in the end, he had no choice. As the law stands, and as precedent dictates, Ruth Ellis had to die.
This is the story of Ruth Ellis, the last woman to be executed in the UK for killing her lover, David Blakely. That property, the one conveniently covered in scaffold for today's filming. On Easter Sunday, April 10th, 1955, Ellis took a taxi to here, to this street, to up there, the second floor flat of that property at 29 Tanza Road, Hampstead, the home of Anthony and Carol Findlater, where she suspected Blakely might be. But as she arrived, Blakely drove off. So there's the building 29 there. Blakely would have driven off most likely that way. Ruth Ellis, she paid off her taxi fare and chose to walk the 1/4 mile around to the Magdala public house on South Hill Park. So let's walk in her footsteps, shall we? So some say Ruth Ellis was a bit of a victim growing up, from a working class upbringing back in Wales, and compounded by her poor decisions made throughout her life. Others would say she's anything but a victim, just a cold-blooded killer. I tell you what though, it's a bit of an incline from Tanza Road. She was probably more than likely already fuming, and then doing this as an incline wouldn't have helped, I don't think. It would have just empowered her anger. Her early existence was dictated by her father, who was said to be out of work more than in work, which for the family proved very difficult. So here we are. She would have turned, so Parliament Hill on Hampstead Heath is just up there, and she would have turned left here, coming from Tanza Road this way. And on the topic of her father, there were also allegations of abuse by him. More detail can be found online about that. She entered the world of nightclub hostessing as a teen, which led to various relationships with men. Yeah, so this is the way she would have walked, straight down here, unless she crossed the road straight away. The Magdala is on the other side, further along. But either way, this is the road Ruth Ellis would have walked. For directness, I'm going to go across the road, because I think she would have just made an absolute beeline for where Blakely was, which she would have known obviously would be the pub. But Ruth Ellis in her life, I mean, she aspired to be much more than she actually was. When she was only 17, she met a Canadian soldier who professed his love for her. She became pregnant and had a son by him. His name was Claire Andre, and their son was named Andy. So she was, now it's on a downward trajectory. I reckon she would have been absolutely storming down here that day in search of Blakely. But yeah, of course, the Canadian guy she met wasn't what he seemed. He was already married with a family of his own. The first of many men in her life to let her down, so it turned out. But during her time, I think she wanted to live out two existences. You know, the safe home life of love and security, but also the high life, you know, the spotlight, the glitzy glamour, the opposite of her early life in Wales. I think she was always searching something more, seeking something more. The bright lights of the West End, anything but the deprived life she'd already experienced. So we're about halfway from Tanza Road now. And yeah, I reckon you can just imagine her there, walking past, storming past, knowing that she had a revolver in her handbag and prepared to use it. Now, by the end of the 1940s, Ellis had become a nightclub owner in Soho. By early 1950, she was making money as a full-service escort and became pregnant by one of her regular clients. Now, in November of that year, she married George Johnston Ellis, a dentist, 41 years of age, with 2 sons. Now, he was divorced when they married at a registry office in Tunbridge. Now, George was a violent and possessive alcoholic who quickly became convinced his new bride was having an affair. Ruth left him a number of times but always returned, and in 1951 she gave birth to a daughter, Georgina. However, George refused to acknowledge paternity, and shortly after they divorced. Her yearning for this two-existence lifestyle was then rewarded in 1951 when she'd been 4 months pregnant. Ruth appeared, although uncredited, as a beauty queen in the Rank organisation film Lady Godiva Rides Again. It's a shame that nothing more materialised in ways of stardom, the following years seeing her move back into the nightclub lifestyle, where in 1953 she became the manager of the Little Club, a nightclub in Knightsbridge. Then she met David Moffat Drummond Blakely, 3 years her junior. And that brings us from Tanza Road, which is down there on the right, and we've come all the way down now and reached Parliament Hill. And here, just ahead on that corner, was her destination, where Blakely's car was parked directly outside. And there used to be a newsagent's just next door, which we'll talk about shortly. But this is the Magdala. Blakely offered to marry Ellis and she consented, but in January of 55 she had a miscarriage after he punched her in the stomach during an argument. Tucked away beside Hampstead Heath is one of London's most infamous pubs, the Magdala. At first glance it looks like a charming Victorian corner pub, but behind these walls lies a story of obsession, violence, and one of Britain's most controversial executions. To be thinking I could be sat where he sat on that day, not knowing that death is waiting for me outside that door. The Magdala was built in the 19th century and named after the 1868 Battle of Magdala in Ethiopia. Locals call it the Maggie, and today it's known for craft beer and cosy interiors. But in 1955, this quiet pub became the scene of this murder has shocked the nation. So Easter Sunday, this glamorous nightclub hostess waited outside this pub for a racing driver lover, David Blakely. Their relationship, being toxic and violent, culminated here with a desperate Ruth and a physically abusive David. At around 9:30 p.m, Blakely and his friend Clive Gunnell emerged. Blakely passed Ellis on the pavement when she stepped out of the doorway of Henshaw's, a newsagent next to the Magdala, which I assume once stood here, this building. Could have very well been that door there, number 2 maybe? But yeah, as Blakely searched for his car keys, Ruth pulled a revolver from a handbag and fired 6 shots in total in front of horrified witnesses. Now the first shot missed, but Ellis pursued Blakely as he ran around his car trying to get away, but she fired a second shot which caused him to collapse. She then stood over him and fired 3 more bullets, with one fired less than a half an inch from his back, leaving powder burns on his skin. Ellis was seen to stand over Blakely, repeatedly trying to fire the revolver's 6th shot, finally firing it into the ground. This bullet ricocheted off the road and injured a bystander, Gladys Yule. David Blakely died outside this pub, the Magdala in Hampstead Heath. And maybe his car, I mean, if he came out that pub, exiting here, turning left, passing what was the newsagents on the left hand side, Ruth Ellis in the doorway, not realising she was there, maybe coming over to his car, which may have been parked here. Ruth comes out there, fires the first shot, he scrambles for an exit, runs to try and get away, comes round his car, but by that time it's too late and she's there. Ruth Ellis firing that second shot. So who knows where David Blakely actually died? I'm assuming it's going to be round about there. Taking into consideration all reports and stuff like that of what happened and people coming out and when she was out and witnesses and the gunshots and things like that. But yeah, that incident happened probably right about there and literally within touching distance of the famous Magdala Pub. Now Ruth Ellis never denied the killing. At her trial, when asked what she intended to do with the gun, she replied, "It's obvious when I shot him. I intended to kill him." That single sentence sealed her fate. But even before that, as far as the law was concerned, she pulled the trigger a number of times, she killed a man in cold blood, and therefore she should be found guilty and hanged.
Ruth Ellis, the jury has convicted you of murder. In my view, it was the only verdict possible. You will be taken hence to the prison in which you were last confined, and from there to a place of execution, where you will suffer death by hanging. And may the Lord have mercy on your soul.
The granddaughter of Ruth Ellis, who was the last woman to be hanged in the UK, is pleading with the government for a conditional pardon. Laura Enston believes her grandmother would never have been executed if the abuse she had received from the man she killed was better understood back then.
Even Raymond Chandler, who wrote The Big Sleep, was deeply moved by the execution. In 1955, he wrote a passionate letter to the Evening Standard newspaper decrying her impending hanging, describing it as an act of medieval savagery. Today the Magdala still stands in Hampstead, stylish, busy, full of history. For years visitors came to see what were believed to be bullet holes outside the pub, although some later claimed They were drilled in afterwards to attract tourists. I think I found them. Yeah, I think they look more like drill holes than bullet holes. Although Ruth Ellis's bullets didn't miss, so she didn't need drill holes to add effect for tourism. But here, all those years ago, probably about centre of your screen, was justice served? So you're left with 3 questions. 1, would you visit London's most infamous pub? 2, that dreaded question no one really wants to answer. Can murder, or specifically this murder, be justified? And 3, should Ruth Ellis have been hanged at all? Or was she just a victim of her own time?
Her blood is in me.
Who am I?
Who am I if she is a cold-blooded killer without any explanation, without any sort of humanity attached to the act? Well, who am I? And that really, really marked your entire life. But ultimately, we're looking for a formal acknowledgement that she should never have been hung. We're not trying to overturn the conviction, but through a modern-day lens, we can now. The Justice Secretary has the opportunity to look at modern laws, modern thinking. I feel quite proud to be associated with her because she was a really remarkable woman.